The magic item paradox is an issue with designing fantasy RPGs and deciding what to do with magic items. As a general thing, players like to get magic items. It is an easy vector of reward for characters, and it kind of shows up. It's a trope, construct, whatever you want to call it, of basically every kind of fantasy RPG or even non-RPGs, even just like they're fantasy roguelikes, fantasy board games. Anytime you can sort of build and construct a character in a fantasy setting, there's always going to be the aspect of gaining equipment that has magical properties. And even outside the fantasy genre, gaining superior equipment is still a thing. But I would say it's most prominent in fantasy. And so the question comes down, as a designer, do you incorporate magic items as part of assumed character progression? Or do you design character progression with the assumption that that magic items are not mandatory? And you can't have it both ways. If magic items are part of character progression, that is, you are assumed to get items of approximately X value at approximately Y level in order to make the math of the game work, then what you have done is set up a situation where if they don't get the magic items, they are actually behind curve. So they have to get magic items on a fairly regular basis in order to keep up. Now, this is not just like get a magic item with a +1 to hit so that your hit bonus keeps up with enemy AC. That may happen, but it is not the only thing that magic items can do. Magic items can allow you to customize your character in ways that are like an aside from or in addition to taking, class features, picking abilities, taking feats or whatever sort of equivalent construct, customizing your character's build separate from gaining magic items that then further affect the build. So it doesn't have to be like just a boring +1 to hit or a +1 to your defenses. It can be interesting things, even items that give you new abilities, new active abilities that you can do, like as an action. So I'm not getting into like, mandatory items are necessarily boring. They can be if they're not particularly well done, but they don't have to be. But nevertheless, if you are assuming that players are going to get X number of magic items of approximately X power or value at certain levels or by certain levels or at a certain rate, then what happens is that you can get into a trap where there's a treadmill of magic items where you have to constantly get newer and better magic items, and you're getting them at such a rate that they stop being special. So there's stop being special is one thing. The other thing is my personal preference, and I know that I am not alone in this, is that I want as much of a character's overall power to be attributed to the character itself. And the more of a character's power that is sourced from their gear, the less special the character feels. Not just there's not just the unspecial aspect of like, oh, we get magic items all the time. We get like 5 magic items per dungeon. We get them all the time. Everybody's getting a new magic item at least once a level. And so they're not new or they're not. It's not that they're not new. It's that they're not unusual. They're expected. But separate from that is that if my character, like let's say, 25% of my character's overall power is due to magic items, well, that means I'm only actually 3/4 of the power of my character. When I think of fantasy stories and fantasy heroes, yeah, they might have magic items that might be quite useful, but you don't usually think of the character in terms of like, they're decked out in gear that is what allows them to overcome obstacles and threats. Usually think of them as like, oh, okay, you're using your wits, you're using your skill to overcome obstacles and threats, and the magic items that you might have just help. And it's like the more magic items cover as far as your overall character abilities, the less special the character feels to me. That's a personal preference. Not everyone feels the same way, but I know that a lot of people do. And I know this because there was much rejoicing when in 4th edition, the Dark Sun campaign guide came out and had rules for inherent bonuses, which means that instead of getting magic items, magic magic weapons, magic neck items, and magic armor, which were the 3 sort of core magic items that you had to get to keep your numbers up, there was a system of gradually increasing those as you improved in level. And if you got a magic item with a higher enhancement bonus, you could use that. But enhancement bonuses and inherent bonuses didn't stack. So you would just get these bonuses over time, so your character would keep up in the math without having to have this constant parade of magic items. I was not the only one who liked that idea. I know I was not. I was there. I saw the celebration. There was quite a lot of people who were quite happy to have a system like this. Not everyone. In fact, probably a majority, or probably a minority is what I meant to say. Less than half, I think. I think most people would rather just have the magic items because magic items are fun to get, you know? Who doesn't like getting a new shiny object? So there's that general philosophy with regards to how magic items interact with characters. You are assumed to get magic items. If you don't, you're in trouble or need something to compensate. The other way to handle magic items is to say that we do not assume any magic items. If you get them, they are an above and beyond boon that pushes you above where you are expected to be for your level. And this is the way that 5th edition kind of describes it in the DMG. The issue, part of the issue is that they kind of waffle back and forth on this. On the one hand, they say that, magic items are always extra. You don't need them. And then at the other side, they say that, like, if your party doesn't have any magic items and doesn't have any spellcasters, you're gonna need to make some adjustments to how you build your encounters, which kind of, like, it is contradictory. It just is. But more to the point, if you have a lot of magic items in a system where magic items are not assumed, your characters are grossly overleveled. 5th edition tries to have it both ways. Let me put a pin in that, actually. I want to fully explore the magic items are extra and optional. So magic items extra and optional means that you have to be extra careful about handing out magic items. They really can't be a major part of character advancement because they're not assumed in the base math. And it's not always a matter of, like, +1 swords. Because the +1 sword by itself, like, the fact that it's increasing chance to hit, the +1 to damage is kind of inconsequential, but the +1 to hit is a significant mathematical change that needs to be accounted for, either because it is assumed or because you are intentionally overgearing or overtuning, I should say, your weapon using characters. At a certain point, if your pluses from magic items get too high, then you start to run into a problem where they are trivializing encounters. Now, this is not taking into account the realities of the situation, which is that martial characters are largely bad, and even decked out in magic items, they tend not to keep up with the power of a spellcaster. So we're not taking that into account. That's not what this video is about. This is assuming that everything was fair. Assuming everything was fair, everything was even, and you give a magic item to your fighter in a system where magic items are not assumed to be part of character progression. So this is above and beyond. Your fighter is where he needs to be, and you give him more. You are automatically sort of imbalancing your game a bit. And that can be fine. Small imbalances for the sake of fun is fine and okay. I think oh man, did I say that in the fun first fallacy video? I'm not sure that I did. I am of the opinion that balance is not the most important thing. Oh, that's right. I did a separate video on balance is not the most important thing, but it is important. But the part where balance is not the most important thing is that, like, small imbalances. You give a magic item to your to a character who is on curve. They are where they need to be balance-wise. And you give them a little boost. They go above and beyond. They're having a good time, and because of that, you can have a good time too. It's just fun to watch people have fun. The issue is that 5th edition tries to have it both ways. They really try to push this narrative that magic items are optional, but then also that, like, you need to make changes to your campaign if you don't have any magic items. And this is reflected in the way that monsters are designed. A lot of high-level monsters are resistant or even straight up immune to damage from non-magical weapons. So if you're running a high-level campaign, you're going to run into a lot of monsters that weapon users just can't hurt. They have no way to hurt them. In addition, I mean, okay, so there is the part where, like, magic users actually tend to benefit from magic items more than weapon users do. Marshals have fewer magic items. It's not even fewer. It's like they're just less impactful. Marshals have less impactful magic item options, even if they're shopping carte blanche out of the DMG. Magic user items are just better. There are more of them, and they are better. There's magic items that you have to be a spellcaster to use. Wand of Fireball, for example, or I think it's wands in general. The necklace of fireballs, I believe you have to be a spellcaster. I could be wrong about that. I thought that might be wrong. I have not looked it up recently. I could have swore I saw something about that. Anyways, there are magic items you have to be a spellcaster to use. To my knowledge, there are no magic items that require you to not be a spellcaster to use. So, like, that kind of shows you a bit of a weirdness in the philosophy behind magic item design. So if you're running a high-level campaign and you're taking the philosophy that magic items are optional and extra, and your weapon-using characters have not received any magic items by the time you are into Tier 3 or even Tier 4, like, what are they doing? Most enemies are resistant or immune to non-magical attacks. Like, this is the way the game is designed. And it creates a situation where you have characters that are completely useless. Like, even without this, they would be mostly useless by comparison to the spellcasting characters. But I'm talking about mostly useless on an absolute level. Like, you run into an enemy, you can't hurt it. What do? You have to run. Like, there's no option. There's no other choice. You cannot win that fight. That is like a weird bit of design that people kind of seem to expect to work. I saw a thread about it today on Reddit, and that's what brought it to mind. That they were asking about how to run a campaign, a low magic campaign with no magic items, for characters that are having difficulty doing any damage. And my first thought was, like, what are you doing? Like, what makes you think that that's going to work? It's obviously not going to work. This is why it's usually recommended that weapon users get their first magic weapon by, like, 3rd level. Like, that's how much they need it. And frankly, the magic items for weapon users just don't scale high enough or fast enough in any kind of, like, reasonable way to keep up with the monsters that they're going to be fighting or their allies who are doing things at the snap of a finger to fully negate encounters. But that's twice now in one video the martial caster disparity comes up. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about equipment. I'm talking about the paradox of, like, of trying to have magic items be special and uncommon and just like this sort of rare special thing that happens, versus having it be incorporated into the math so that it works when you get it and it's not overpowered and it's not like it doesn't disrupt the game. It's non-disruptive. And it's nearly impossible to have both at once. It may be possible, but it is nearly impossible to have both at once. I'm trying now off the top of my head to think if I've seen it happen in a game. And I don't think so. Not in any kind of like medium to heavyweight game like D&D, where magic items are treated in the way that D&D tends to treat magic items, even on a conceptual level. It can work in narrative first games, such as Blades in the Dark, any Powered by the Apocalypse type game. Like, you can do these things because power isn't really the same thing in those kinds of games. But any kind of game where like you are building a character, like your character is being built and not just like, and not represented for narrative purposes, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense with that. D&D type games, I don't think you can have it both ways. So I would say pick one or the other and choose a system that does that. And 5e tends to do neither. If you want a game that that really needs magic items or really assumes magic items, 4th edition does magic items pretty well. 4th edition has some baller magic items, but you do have to get them at a certain rate, unless you're using the inherent bonus system, which you can, which does sort of free you up to distribute magic items that aren't one of those 3 core item categories. D&D style games that have no assumed magic items. I'm not sure that I've seen an example. Like, it's clearly possible. It's clearly possible that you could do it that way. I think most don't, just because, as I said before, people like getting magic items. And so why would you write a system where that doesn't happen, right? So I would say lean towards more like cloud, or not, lean towards more narrative focused games. My phone is doing things, so I'm going to go ahead and stop now.